Hello everyone! In this video I'm going to walk you through a full-stack MERN project that includes a complete authentication and authorization system using access and refresh tokens. We will implement user registration, login, logout, and automatic token refreshing. The application supports role-based access control. Admin users can access protected routes like the user list, while regular users are restricted. The frontend dynamically renders different dashboards based on the user's role. And for efficient data handling, pagination is implemented on the backend and integrated on the frontend. Let's get started. So let's open our terminal, and here we want to create two folders. So let's say make directory, and here let's say backend. And now we have backend folder, and let's make directory frontend. Okay, now let's clear our terminal and go to the backend folder. And inside backend folder, we need to initialize a Node.js project. So let's write npm init-y and do it. As you can see, now we have package.json file. Okay, and now let's install the following packages. Let's say npm install express. It's a framework built on top of Node.js. Then let's write .env to get access to the environment variables. Then bcrypt to hash our passwords. Then let's install mongoose to be able to work with MongoDB. Then cookie parser to handle tokens in cookies. Then let's install CORS to resolve any CORS problems, and let's install JSON Web Token to create and verify tokens. So let's press enter and install these packages. Okay, as you can see, now I have node models and package-log.json file. And here we can see the dependencies that we installed. Now in the backend folder, let's create a file called server.js, or you can call it app.js or index.js. And here I want to say import express from express. But this syntax isn't available to me, so inside this package.json under these scripts, I can write type, and from here I want to choose module, so that now this syntax is available to me. Now let's create an instance of our application by saying const app will be equal to express. Okay, now let's say that our application will listen on some port. For that we need to create a variable, but for now I will write it manually. Okay, and here we can say console log server is running on port, and it will be 5000. Okay, now let's create .env file where we will store sensitive information about our application. So inside backend folder, we can create file called .env, and here let's create a variable, and I will assign it to be 5000. So I created this variable. Now to get access to it, first of all, I need to import a package called .env from .env. So let's import .env from .env. And now we need to say .env.config. So if we hover over, you can see that it loads .env file. So this .env file contents into process.env by default. So it means that we can get access to this variable. We can get access to this value by saying process.env.port thanks to this .env.config. And here we can write it like this, and in case of some problems, we can write it so that it will be 5000. And let's use this variable here. And here we need to use backticks to be able to use this variable. So let's change that. Okay. Now let's start our application. For that, I need to say node server.js. And as you can see, server is running on port 5000. And now we want our server to automatically restart when we make some changes in our code. So for that, first of all, we can stop our server by pressing Ctrl and C, and we can install a package called nodemon. But I will write dash and capital D so that it will be installed as a dev dependency. So if we open package.json, under these dependencies, we will see a dev dependency. So thanks to NodeMon, when there will be some changes in our code, our server will restart immediately. Okay, now let's start our application again by saying node server.js, and now under these scripts we can say dev, and here we can say NodeMon and the name of our file, which is server.js. So now we can actually stop our server and we can say npm run dev. So as you can see, now NodeMon is watching. Okay, now what I suggest to do is to connect to MongoDB Atlas. Okay, so let's do it. For that, we need to visit their website. So here, let's click sign in. If you don't have an account, first of all, you need to register and then you need to log in. But I already have an account, so I will log in using Google. Okay, here let's click new project and then let's give it a name. I will say MERN user system. Let's click next. Let's click create project. Let's click create a cluster. Here I want to choose this free option and I don't want to preload sample dataset, and everything else can be left as it is. So let's click create deployment. Here, just in case, we can copy our password and then let's click create database user, choose a connection method, and we want to connect to our application using this option, which is drivers. And here we have our connection string. So let's copy it, and inside .env file, we can create a variable Mongo_URI will be equal to this connection string, which already includes our username and our password. So let's save this file, and here let's click done. And now if we go to clusters and if we click browse collections, as you can see, we don't have any data yet. So let's get back to the code. So now inside backend folder, let's create a new folder called config, and we want to connect to our MongoDB using this connection string. So inside config, let's create a file called db.js, and here we want to create a function, as I have already mentioned, to connect to our database. So for that, let's import Mongoose from Mongoose. Let's say export const connect db. Our function will be asynchronous, and here we can use try and catch block. And in case of some problems, we can console.error an error, and we can say error connection to MongoDB and show the actual error, and we can exit the process with failure. So if it is 1, it means that it is unsuccessful and our application will stop immediately. But if we will not have any problems, we can say const connection will be equal to await mongoose.connect, and here we want to provide our connection string. So let's say Mongo_URI. Okay, and then we need to see if we manage to connect. For that, we can say console.log, and here we can say MongoDB connected and show the host. If we see this console log, if we see this message, it means that we managed to connect. So let's save this file, and inside server.js, we want to use this function that we have just created. So let's use this function right here. Let's say connect db, and make sure to write .js here, otherwise we will have problems. So let's open our terminal, and now after saving this file, we should see server is running on port 5000, and this text which will be MongoDB connected, so you will see it yourself. So let's save this file. As you can see, server is running on port 5000, and we see that MongoDB connected, and we see this host. So it means that we successfully connected to MongoDB. Okay, so let's close our terminal, and now I suggest creating one more folder, and it will be models. And here let's create our user model. So let's say user.js, and here we want to define what kind of properties we want our user to have. Okay, so let's say import Mongoose from Mongoose, because we are using MongoDB as our database, and of course all users in our database will have these properties that we're gonna define right now. Okay, so let's say const user schema will be equal to new mongoose.schema. Okay, so here let's say that all our users should have username and its type will be string. Then all of them should have email and the type will also be string. So let's say type string, and it has to be required and it has to be unique. Then all our users should have password, type will be string and it will also be required. And for the username, we can actually also say that it has to be required. Okay, and we should write a comma here. Then we need to have roles. Okay, so we can either say is admin, but I want to say role, and it will be like this. Type will be string, but by default it will be user. And we can say enum, so we will either have just a regular user or an admin. Okay, so for that we can do it like this. So basically enum means that this role can have only user or admin, and you can add something else here, but this is why we have enum here. Okay, and then we also want to know when a certain user was created. So for that we can say timestamps to be true. Okay, so to actually use this schema, we need to say export default mongoose.model, and the name will be user, and we need to provide this variable which is user schema. Okay, now we have created our user model. It's great. All our users will have username, email, password, and role, which will be only user or admin, and we will also know when a user was created or updated. Now we can create one more folder for controllers. So let's say controllers, and here we can create a file called Auth controller.js. Okay, and here let's create functions to be able to register, to be able to log in, and so on. Okay, so let's immediately import our user model because we're gonna work with it. Our user model that we have just created, and let's say user.js. So let's create a function to be able to register. So let's say export const register. It will be asynchronous and it's gonna have request and response objects. And then we want to destructure username, email, and password from request.body from our client. So our client will send these properties and then we want to destructure them. And we need to make sure if they are provided or not. So if they are not provided, we can show this message. We can throw this error. So we can return response with status 400, meaning that it is bad request. And in the message, we can say all fields are required. Okay, and then we can create a variable called existing user, and actually let's use try and catch block, and here let's say catch. Okay, and we can create a variable called const existing user, and we need to try to find our user in our database using the email provided by a client. So we take this email from request.body and then we try to find a user in our database. So we use this model as you can see. So if our user really exists with this email, this variable becomes true. So let's say if existing user, so if it is true, we need to show this message which says user already exists. So we can return response with status 400, and in the message we can just see user already exists. It means that you will not be able to register. Okay, and then if a user doesn't exist yet, we want to create one. But first of all, let's hash a user's password. So a user will type his password inside a register form. But before saving it in our database, we want to hash it because we don't want to store plain text passwords in our database. So for that, let's create a variable called hashed password, and we can hash this password using bcrypt. But first of all, we shouldn't forget to import bcrypt from bcrypt.js. So now we have this variable, and it represents this password which just became hashed. Okay, and now we have this variable called hashed password. Okay, and now we can create a variable called user will be equal to new user, and here we just want to provide these fields which are username, email, password will be equal to this hashed password. Okay, so we just used all these properties, and according to our model we created this user, and let's just save our user by saying await user.save method. Okay, and in case of some problems we can throw an error by saying error registering user and show this error, and we can return response with status code 500, and in the message we can say server error. So let's save it. Okay, now we have a function to register users. Great. Now I suggest creating a function to be able to log in. So here let's say export const login, and again we need to destructure email and password from request.body. So let's do it. Okay, and if they are not provided, we need to show the message email and password are required, and we can return response with status 400. Then we can use try and catch block. Okay, and now we need to try to find a user. So we need to find out if there is a user with this email in our database first. So let's say const user await user model dot find one method, and we want to find him using this email which is provided inside request.body. Then if a user can be found in our database, this variable becomes true. It means that this user exists. But if this variable is false, it means that we cannot find a user in our database. Then if user isn't true, we can say return response with status code 400, and in the JSON, in the message, we can say user not found. Okay, but if user exists, we need to find out if passwords match. So if a password stored in our database associated with this email is equal to a password which is provided by a user inside request.body. And for that we can say const isMatch will be equal to await bcrypt.compare method, and this password represents a password which is just provided from request.body, and user.password represents the password that we store in our database. Okay, so we just need to compare them, and if they are equal to each other, isMatch becomes true. But if isMatch isn't true, we can immediately see that a user provided invalid credentials. So we can say return response with status 400, and in the message we can say invalid credentials. Okay, now that the user is logged in, we need a way to keep them authenticated across the application. So this is where access token and refresh token come in. So for now, we can just say const access token will be equal to, and you may wonder what is an access token. So the access token is like a temporary pass that proves the user is logged in. So usually it's short-lived, and in our case, it will expire in 15 minutes. And we send this token to the frontend and store it. And usually it is stored in memory or state. So every time the user makes a protected request, like fetching user data, this token is sent with the request to prove identity. Okay, and now we need to create a signed JWT that will be used to authenticate the user for protected routes. Okay, so for that we need to say JWT, but first of all we need to import JWT from JSON Web Token. So let's say import JWT from JSON Web Token. Okay, and here let's use this sign method, and if we hover over, you can see that it synchronously signed the given payload into a JSON web token string payload. So payload is basically what info is inside the token. Okay, and here let's write what kind of info we need to provide. So first of all, we can say ID, which will be equal to user._ID. So payload is basically the data that we include in the token, and in this case ID is the unique ID of the user from the database. And then we can provide role, and it's the user's role, like user or admin. Okay, and then after this we need to provide process.env.access token secret. So it will be a secret string used to sign the token. So it will ensure that only our server can create valid tokens. So we need to use it. And also we can write when this token will expire. And as I said, it will be 15 minutes. So for that, we can write 15 minutes. So let's save it for now. And now, as you can see, this code is convenient to read. So we have this variable, and actually here we need to use access token secret. Okay. And as I have said, it will expire in 15 minutes. So it makes the token short-lived. So even if it's stolen, it becomes useless after 15 minutes. Okay. And as you can see, we don't have this variable yet. So we will need to create it. So let's do it. I will just copy the name of this variable, and let's open .env file and let's paste it here. So basically, you can use some online tools to generate this token secret, and after that you can copy and paste it here. And I will do the same. I will just use some online tools to create this secret, and I will just paste it here. So for that we can use this website, for example. So here we can say open SSL rand -base 64 and how many, like how long we want our string to be. So let's press enter, and as you can see, we have our string. So we can just copy it. So let's copy it and we can use it. So basically this command, it will generate 32 random bytes encoded in base 64 format. Okay, let's paste it right here, and basically we can immediately create one more variable for refresh token secret. So let's just copy and paste it here, and here I will say refresh. Okay, and now let's use this command one more time, and we have one more secret key. So let's copy it, and we need to change it with what we have just copied. So let's paste it here and save it. Okay, let's get back to our auth controller.js, and now this is valid. So because we have this variable, and this variable has a secret key. Okay, and as you can see, as I have already said, we set an expiration time, which will be 15 minutes. So after it expires, we will use the refresh token to get a new one. So let's say const refresh token, and it will be in the same way as we did for our access token. So I actually can just copy it and paste it here, and let's say refresh token, and let's change it here as well. It has to be like this. All has to be uppercase, and the expiration time will be 7 days. So now you may wonder why we need to use refresh token, and when we need to use access token, and when we need to use refresh token. So after login, we generate both an access token and a refresh token. So the access token is short-lived and used in every API request to prove the user is authenticated. And the refresh token lasts longer and is used like silently behind the scenes to keep the user logged in, even when the access token expires. And it makes our application secure. Okay, you will understand everything better as we keep going. Okay, and now our goal is to keep the user logged in securely even after the access token expires. But you may wonder, where should we store the refresh token? We need to say that not in local storage or session storage. because it's too risky and it can be stolen via XSS. So the best practice to store it in an HTTP only cookie, because it can't be accessed by JavaScript. Okay, so here we have the following. So here we have this line. It sets a cookie named refresh token with the value of the refresh token JWT. So as you can see, here we have it. It's just the name and it's the value. Then we have HTTP only true. It means that JavaScript on the frontend cannot access this cookie. And it is done for safety purposes, so it prevents cross-site scripting attacks from stealing your refresh token. Then we have secure process.env.node.env. Actually, we don't have this variable, so this ensures that the cookie is only sent over HTTPS, not HTTP. So this keeps it safe from man-in-the-middle attacks. So in development, it allows HTTP. In production, it must be HTTPS. Then we have same-site strict. It prevents the cookie from being sent along with cross-site requests. So by doing this, it helps protect against cross-site request forgery attacks. And as you can see, here we have 7 days. So this refresh token expires in 7 days. So after 7 days, the browser will automatically delete the cookie. Okay, so after we generate the refresh token, we store it in an HTTP only cookie, so it's safe from JavaScript access. And this way, the browser will automatically send it with future requests. And we can use it on the backend to refresh access tokens without requiring the user to log in again. And the cookie is secure and can't be read by JavaScript, and it expires in 7 days. Okay, I think that is clear to you. And then we can say the following. We can say response.json. We basically can return status 200, meaning that everything went successful. And in the JSON, we can show access token and user's data, which will be ID, username, email, and role. And in case of some problems, we can show the error in the console, and we can return response with status code 500, meaning that it is server error. Okay, so let's save it for now. Okay, and now we can create another function called export const refresh token. So now you may be confused, but without this function, the user would have to log in every 15 minutes, and it's a terrible experience. So we absolutely need to use this function, okay? So first of all, here we can say const token will be equal to request.cookies.refresh token. So as you remember, here we said that we will store this refresh token in an HTTP only cookie. So that's why we can get access to this token by saying request.cookies.refresh token, because here we store it inside cookies. Okay, and then if we don't have this token, which is refresh token, so if there is no token, we need to return response with status code 401, which means unauthorized, and with the message no refresh token provided. And then we can use try and catch block. And in case of some problems, we can show the error in the console and return response with status code with 500 and the message server error. Okay, then we need to verify the refresh token. For that, we can say const decoded will be equal to jwt.verify, and here we have this token that we have extracted from request.cookies.refresh token and our secret, which we have inside .env file. So if we hover over, you can see that it synchronously verifies given token using a secret or a public key to get a decoded token. Okay, and then we can fetch the user to make sure that the user still exists. For example, an account, to make sure that the account wasn't deleted or blocked. Okay, and if there is no user, we can return response with status code 404, meaning that not found, and in the message we say user not found. And then we can create this new access token variable, and here we just generate a fresh access token so the user can continue making requests. Here everything is the same as we did it here, okay? And then in the response, we can send the new access token back to the front end. And also we can show user data and response with status code 200, meaning that everything went successful. So what will happen if we don't use this function? So imagine a situation that access token expires, then API calls fail, then user gets logged out. So we lose the silent refresh experience, and it makes refresh tokens useless because we are not using them to issue new tokens. So this refresh token function is what makes the refresh token useful. When the access token expires, we don't want to log the user out, so we send the refresh token stored in the cookie to this endpoint, verify it, and if it is valid, issue a new access token, allowing the user to stay logged in without re-entering their credentials. Okay, and then we can create a function to be able to log out. So let's say export const logout. And here we can also use try and catch block. And in case of some errors, we can show the error message in the console and return response with status code 500 and this message server error. Okay, and then when we log out, we want to remove the refresh token from the browser by clearing the cookie. Okay, so without it, the user could still stay logged in silently because refresh token would still work. And when we say response.clear cookie refresh token, we tell the browser, hey, delete the refresh token we set earlier. So it clears the secure HTTP only cookie and it prevents the frontend from refreshing the access token again. Even if the access token is still valid, the session will end after it expires. So this is how we can terminate the session on the backend side. And after clearing the cookie, we can return response with status code 200. And in the message, we can say logged out successfully. So let's save it. Okay. Okay. And now we have functionality to be able to register, to be able to log in, to be able to refresh token, and to be able to log out. Now let's create a new file inside this controllers folder. So let's say user controller.js. Okay, let's import our user model, and we shouldn't forget to write .js here. Okay, and now we can create a function to get all the users. So let's say export get users. Okay, it has to be asynchronous, and here we can use try and catch block. And in case of some errors, we can show the error in the console and return response with status code 500. And in the message, we can show this server error message. And here we should write const. We shouldn't forget to do it. Okay. And here we can say const page will be equal to parse int request query.page. And if it is not provided, by default, it will be 1. And then we want to say how many users per one page we want to show. So let me explain it to you. So here, const page, it extracts pagination parameters from the query string. Okay. For example, it can be like this. And if not provided, it will default to 1. And here we can set the limit of how many users per one page we want to show. For example, I can say that it will be 2. Then we can say skip. So const skip will be equal to page minus 1, and we should multiply it by a limit. So this basically calculates how many users to skip based on the page. So if we are on the first page, we want to skip 0 because we want to show 2 users. If we are on the second page, we want to skip 2 users. If we are on the third page, we want to skip 4 users. And I think that you get it, you get how it works, okay? And then we can create a variable called total will be equal to await user count documents, okay? So by doing this, we get the total number of users in the database, okay? And then we can say const users. So here we have this line, it queries the users, but at the same time, we don't want to include passwords. So by writing minus password, we exclude the password field to avoid sending it to the front end. So by doing this, we just apply pagination, because here we have skips and we have limits, okay? So here we have users will be equal to user.find, then we use this skipping, we have our limiting, and we don't want to include password, because really, why should we even include password, right? So we shouldn't include password. And then in the response, we can say response, response.status with 200. We can send users, total, then total pages, which will be equal to math.seal function. So if we hover over, it returns the smallest integer greater than or equal to its numeric argument. And then the current page, which represents this page. You may wonder why we don't use math.floor function, because we want to round up. So even if the last page has just 1 user, we still need a page for it. So for example, let's say that total is equal to 7 users and limit is equal to 2 users per page. So it means that we have 3.5. If we used math.floor, eventually we would have 3. So we would miss the last user, but with math.seal function, we will have 4, and it is correct because we will not lose the last user and we will have 4 pages. Okay, I think that is clear, and now we can move on to the next function. Now let's create a function to delete a user. So let's say export const delete user. Okay. And here let's use try and catch block. And in case of some errors, we can show the error in the message and return response with status 500. Okay, and here we can say const user will be equal to await user. So first of all, we need to find a user by ID, and then we need to delete it. So we need to say find by ID and delete methods, and here we can say request.params.id. So we will get this ID from request.params, and using this ID we will find a user in our database, and you'll understand everything better as we keep going. And if there is no user, we can return response with status code 404, meaning that user not found. And if there is no user, we return it, but if we manage to delete it, then we can return response with status 200, and in the message we can say user deleted successfully. So user was deleted successfully, meaning that everything went correctly. And now we have 2 functions to get all the users and to delete a user. Of course, the functionality to be able to delete a user will belong to an admin, and we will handle it a bit later. Okay, now we need to create a function to get profile. So basically we want to get user info. So for that we can say export const get profile, and it has to be synchronous request and response. Here let's use try and catch block, and in case of some errors we can show the error in the console and return this response. Okay, now we need to find a user in our database. So basically, of course, we need to find a user in our database using his ID, which will come from request.user, and we want to exclude his password. And if there is no user, we want to return this response. And if everything is correct, we just say response with status code 200, and in the JSON we want to show this user. Okay, so that's it for this file. Here we will have only 3 functions. Okay, and now inside this backend folder, let's create a folder called middleware, and let's create a file called auth middleware.js. So here we need to create functions which will check that the request has a valid JWT in the authorization header. So if it is valid, we will decode the token and attach the user info to the request. And then this will become true. So as I said, we will decode the token and attach the user info to the request. And then we'll be able to get access to users ID. So we can say request.user.id. And that's why we need to use this middleware first. Okay. And we will have middleware to verify token and then to verify role if it is just a regular user or an admin. Okay, so here we will need to use JWT package. So first of all, let's import JWT from JSON Web Token, and here let's say export const verify token function. Okay, and here we will have request, response, and next parameters since it's a middleware. And here we need to say const auth header, const auth header will be equal to request.headers.authorization. So by doing this, we will get the authorization header from the incoming request, and the header should look like this. So let me type it. It will be like authorization, then colon, bearer, and the actual token. Okay, and let me remove it. And then if there is no auth header, we can say, so if auth header isn't true, we can return response with status code 401 and the message no token provided. So it means that the client didn't provide a token and they are not authenticated. Then we need to extract token from this auth header. For that, we can say const token auth header.split, and we need to get the second argument. So as I said, it will look like this: authorization, then bearer, and token. So we just split this and we make it to be an array. It will be like this. It will be like bearer and then token. Okay, and we split it using this empty string so that they will be split like this. And then using this one, we want to get the value. We want to get this token, not this bearer, but this token. Okay, so that's why we can write it like this. So we say const token will be equal to auth header, which is this dot split, and we can get the actual token. So it extracts just the token part. And then if token is true, we need to verify it. So we can say JWT dot verify. Okay, so if the token is valid, it decodes the token and gives us the user object payload. And if the token isn't valid, it gives an error. Okay, so if error is true, we can just return response with status code 403, which means forbidden, and we just provide this message. It means that you are authenticated, but your credentials aren't valid. And then we have request.user will be equal to user. So the decoded token payload is attached to the request object so that the next middleware or route can access request.user.id, request.user.role, and so on. And that's why we can say it like this. We can say request.user.id. Why? Because as you can see, we have request.user is equal to user. So the decoded token payload is attached to the request object. So for example, soon we will have a function called verify role, and there we will check request.user.role. And then we have next. So once everything is verified and the user is added to the request, next function passes control to the next middleware or route handler. So in summary, verify token checks that the request has a valid JWT in the authorization header. If it's valid, we decode the token and attach the user info to the request. If it's missing or invalid, we block access. So it keeps our protected routes secure by ensuring only logged in users can access them. And now we can create a role-based access control middleware. So here, let's say export const verify role. Okay. And here actually we don't have roles, but we will have only role. And here we can say return request response and next. Okay, let's just make it to be available. So this function takes in a role like admin or user and returns a middleware function. Later we will reuse this and we will protect our routes. And this return request response and next, it's a inner function. It's actual middleware that Express will run. And it assumes that, as you can see here, it assumes that request.user is already set by verified token. So it assumes that it is already handled by verified token. And here actually we can say the following. We can say const user role will be equal to request.user, and we can use this optional chaining, and only then we can take this user role and compare it with this incoming role. Okay, so here by doing user role is equal to request.user.role, we get the role from the authenticated user. Then we use optional chaining here. We use optional chaining to prevent crashes if request.user is undefined. And as I said, request.user must have been set earlier by verified token. Then we check if user role is not equal to role. So if the user's role does not match the required role, we can return this response with status code 403 forbidden. So we can say access denied. And here we have next. If the user has the required role, we move on to the next middleware or route handler. So let's save this file. Okay. Now we can verify tokens, and moreover, we can verify roles. Okay, and now inside backend folder, let's create a new folder called routes, and inside let's create a file called auth.js. So now let's work with our routes. So now let's register our routes. Let's import Express from Express first. Okay, and then we can say const router will be equal to express.router. So we can create a new instance of an Express outer this way. And let's say the following. Let's say router.post method, and the endpoint will be register. And then we need to provide the function that we need to refer to when the endpoint will be register and when the method will be post. So here let's say register, and we can import register function from controllers Auth controller, and we shouldn't forget to write .js here. Okay, and we should do the same for login. So let's say router.post login, and we should import it. Okay, then router.get method, and here we need to say refresh token. So the endpoint will be just refresh, and we need to provide this refresh.token function, and then we need to say router.post. Oops, it has to be post when we logout function. And to be able to use these routes, we need to say default router. So this is a modular way to group related routes together. In this case, we have auth related routes. And maybe you have a question why some routes have post method and why some have get method. It is because we need to follow this simple rule. So use get to retrieve data. So it means that there will be no side effects. So that's why here we have this refresh token, and there will be no side effects. But we need to use post method to send data or change something. So if you think about it, I think that you'll be able to understand it. So when we register, or when we log in, or when we log out, we send data or change something. But when we use this refresh function, refresh token function, we don't make any side effects, we just retrieve data. So again, we use post for actions that involve sending or modifying data, like registering, login, or logging out. We use get for the requests that only retrieve data, like refreshing the access token using a cookie. So this keeps our API consistent with REST principles. So let's save this file, and I think that now it's clear to you. Okay, and now inside this routes folder, we can create a new file called users.js, and here we will protect some of our routes. And here we will use route protection. So first of all, let's import Express from Express. Okay. And now we can create, actually we need to say const router express.router. Now we can say router.get. Here it will be the root path of this router. Okay. So it refers to the root path of this router, not the full site URL. Okay. I think that you get it. And now we can protect this route by saying, first of all, by saying verified token. So now we need to check for valid access token. Okay. Then we can verify this. Oops. I needed to say we need to protect this route by saying verify role. And here we need to provide that it will be only for admin. So it means that only admins can work with get users function. Okay. So this route is used for admin panels where we will list all users. It means that only admins can work with this get users. It means that if we open this get users, only admins can work with this function. Okay. So we verified, oops, I said it again. So we protect this route by verify token function, then by verifying role. So we make sure that this function is accessible only to logged in users who are admins. Okay. And here we also need to provide .js everywhere so that we will not have any problems. Then when it comes to deleting, we can say router.delete, and the same logic is here, but we need to import this function first of all. Again, only accessible to logged in users who are admins. And here, as you can see, we allow the route to be dynamic, and we allow it to respond to URLs like this. Okay, here we can have API users. Let me fix it. So we will delete our users using their IDs, and it can be like this, or it can be like this. So it's a dynamic parameter. I think that you understand why we use this dynamic parameter, because we need to identify who we need to delete. Okay, here it doesn't matter because we want to get access to all the users, but here we make it to be dynamic. So using this ID, we can identify a user and then we can delete a user. Okay. Then we need to, yes, we actually need to export default router, and then we need to say router.get, but here it will not be profile. The endpoint will be me. Then we need to protect it by verified token, and we need to provide the actual function. So it means that regular users can access their own profile, and it only requires being logged in. Okay, it only requires being logged in. And this is how frontend will get the current user's info and display it on the page. So that's it. Let's save this file. So let's make a summary. And as we can see, this line defines user-related API routes using Express router. Some routes, like viewing all users or deleting a user, are restricted to admins using the verify token and verify role middleware. The /me route is for any logged in user to get their own profile info. Okay, that's it. Now let's go to server.js file and make some changes there. Testing in Postman, but we can't do it right now because we need to make some changes here. So let's make these changes here. Okay, first of all, let's come here and say app.use express.json. So why we do it? So by doing it, it enables Express to automatically parse incoming JSON data in request.body. So when a frontend sends data using, for example, Axios, the body arrives as JSON string. For example, imagine that we will have this, but you don't even need to imagine it because we need to find it. So here, as you can see, we have username, email. We get it from request.body, as you can see, but without saying express.json, request.body would be undefined. Okay, so that's why we need to say express.json. Then we can say app.use course. And first of all, let's import course from course. So here, let's say import course from course. And then we can see that, the origin will be, so as you can see, the origin of our frontend URL will be 5173, and then we need to see that credentials will be true. So why we need to write course? So our frontend and backend will be on different ports. Right now, the port of backend is 5000 and the port of frontend will be this. And we need to use course package so that it enables cross-origin resource sharing, allowing our frontend to talk to our backend. And by default, the browser blocks requests from a different origin, okay? And then we need to see credentials to be true. It is crucial for sending cookies between frontend and backend. So that's why we need to see credentials to be true. Then we need to see app.use cookie parser. But first of all, of course, we need to import cookie parser from cookie parser. So let's do it. Import cookie parser. So why we need it? It will parse cookies from incoming requests and will add them to request.cookies. So we are storing the refresh token in an HTTP only cookie. And when the frontend sends a request to /refresh, we can access it. So let's find it where it was. So as I said, when the frontend sends a request to /refresh, we can access token like this. Without this middleware, this line would be undefined. Okay, so that's why we need to use this cookie parser package. Okay, and then we need to use our routes that we created. So let's say app.use, and let's say that the path will be API auth, and we need to say, let's say auth routes, and then let's say app.use. The path will be API users and user routes. First of all, let's import auth routes. So let's say import auth routes from routes auth.js, and the same for user routes. So by doing this, for example, by doing app.use API auth routes, we mount all auth related routes under API auth. So it means that we will be able to get access to the routes inside these auth routes, like login, like refresh, like this. It will be like login or refresh. Okay. And as I said, it mounts all auth related routes under API auth. So it means that we'll be able to get access to them. And the same works here. That's it. So that's it, guys. Our backend is ready, and let's save this file. Now what I suggest to do is to go to Postman and test our routes. And guys, as you can see, we have that our app crashed because we import cookie parser 2 times. So I will just remove it from here and let's save our file. And now we have one more problem. It says that we cannot find package bcrypt.js in auth controller.js. So let's get back here. And actually we have it here. Okay, and let's go to the package.json file. And here we have bcrypt, but we should install bcrypt.js. Okay, so it means that now we need to stop our application and we need to uninstall bcrypt. So we need to say npm uninstall bcrypt. Sorry guys for this inconvenience. So we uninstalled it, and instead we need to install bcrypt.js. Okay. So now we have bcrypt.js, and now everything has to be correct. So let's get back to server.js and let's start our application by saying npm run dev. And now, as you can see, server is running on port 5000 and we see that MongoDB connected. Okay, we resolved this problem, and one more thing that we can do to prevent some kind of problems during development is that we need to go to MongoDB Network Access tab. So let's open it, and from here we need to add IP address, and we can add allow access from anywhere. So because sometimes during development we can get some kind of problems simply because of the fact that we didn't allow access from anywhere. So let's click confirm, and it will take some time. And as you can see, it says includes your current IP address. So it allows access from anywhere. Now we have that its status is active. So let's go to clusters and click browse collections. And here we don't have any users yet. And this test is the default name of the database because I didn't give it any name. Okay, so let's go to Postman. Okay guys, so here you have Postman, and let's click this button to create a new collection. Let's say blank collection, and let's give it a name. I will say MERN user system. So let's save it. Okay, and let's click this plus button to add a new request. And first of all, let's do a post method, and let's make a request to be able to register. So as you can see, I have this auto suggested because previously I had some projects where I had this path. Okay, and it is correct. And why we have API auth register? It is because here, as you can see, we have this API auth, and after this path we have these auth routes which are mounted after this path. Okay, and this API auth is mounted after localhost 5000. So if we open auth routes, as you can see, we have this endpoint. So that's why it is done that way. Okay, so now we have our path. Let's go to body raw, and here we need to provide fields to be able to register a user. So we have username, and here let's say Robert, then email field, let's say robert@gmail.com, and a password. Let's say Robert. Okay, so let's click send button. And now it's taken too much time. So let's cancel it and find out why. Well, it is because after saving a user to a database, we don't send any response. So that's why it was like infinite. But we need to return a response. So let's say response with status code 201, and meaning that everything went successful. And also we can show user data. So let's do it. So what user data can we show? We can show username, ID, email, and so on. And here we need to have a closing parenthesis. Okay. And we need to have one more closing curly brace. Okay. So let's save it. And now what we can do, let's get back to Postman and let's click again to be able to register this user. And we have this message, user already exists. It means that we already have this user in our database. So let's go and see it. So here let's click refresh. And here we have our user. Username, email, hash password, the time when he was created, and his role. Okay, now let's try to create one more user. So here I will say John, and the email will be John, and the password will be John. So let's click send. And as you can see, we have message user registered successfully, and we have his data. Okay, let's rename this request to be able to register. So let's say register, and we can save this request by pressing Ctrl and S. Okay, now let's create a new request. So here let's click add request, and it will be for login. So let's immediately say it will be login, and the method will also be post. And let's choose this path, and all we need to do here is to say login. Then again we need to go to body, raw, and here all we need to do is to remove this username, because when we log in we don't need to use this username. And as you can see, here we have text, but we need to set it to be JSON so that we will not have any problems. So let's click this button, and as you can see, we successfully managed to log in. And here we have access token and user data. Okay, now let's save this request by pressing Ctrl and S. Now, as you remember, we have some routes which are protected. So for example, we can come here. Oops. So as you can see, to be able to get all the users, the role must be admin. And our current user who is logged in, his role is user. So now let's try to get all the users using this token, and the role of this user is just user. So we handled that in backend, and we should see that our access will be denied. Okay, so let's make sure that everything is correct. So for that, I will create a new request. I will say get all users as a user. So not as an admin, but just as a user. It has to be a post method. And here we need to say users. And this is the path, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it's just the root path. And we verify this route, first of all, by this function, where we need to see if token is provided or not. And then even if token is provided, we need to make sure that the role is admin, particularly for this route. So let's try to test it. So the method has to be get, and let's click send. And as you can see, we have no token provided. It is because I didn't provide any token. Actually, we need to take this token, and in authorization, we need to choose bearer token and provide the token here. Okay, so let's click send. And now, even if I provided the token, as you can see, access denied. Why? Because my role is just a user. So as you saw previously, I didn't provide any token, and I saw a message which said no token provided. Then I provided a token, but we see access denied. Okay, so because for regular users, this route isn't accessible. Okay, so as I said, first of all, we have this protection and this protection. But for a regular user, we should get data when we work with this route, when we want to get personal info. So let's try to work with it. So here we need to say me, and let's click send. As you can see, I can see my personal info. And this route is protected by verify token function. If I remove this token and click send, as you can see, no token provided. Okay, and the same would happen if I tried to delete a user, because as you can see, here we verify a role. It has to be admin, but currently I am logged in as a user. So now let's try to log in as an admin. So for that, first of all, let's go to this register. Well, actually, let's save this tab, okay? And now let's go to register and let's create a new user. I will say Tom, and here let's say Tom and Tom. So let's click send, and we managed to register a user, and as you can see, his role is user. We can manually change his role to be admin in our database, so let's do it. So first of all, let's refresh, and as you can see, here we have our users, and we can manually change the role of this user to be admin. So let's click update, and now this user is admin. So let's get back to Postman. Now let's try to log in as an admin. So let's say Tom and Tom. We managed to log in. Now we need to copy this token, and let's create a new request to get all users as an admin. So let's say get all users as an admin. And it has to be get method, and here we need to remove this. Now we need to provide a token here, and that's it. So let's click send. As you can see, we have all users in our database, and since we said that at one page we want to see only 2 users, right now we have only 2 users, which are Robert and John. But as you know, in total, we have 3 users. So to see the next page, we can come here and say page to be 2. So let's click send. And as you can see, now the current page is the second page, and we get our 3rd user. Okay, so as you can see, we can work with this route. Why? Because it is accessible only to admins, and since we are logged in as an admin, we can work with it. Okay, so let's save it, and now let's create a route to be able to delete users. So it has to be delete, and the path has to be users, and here we need to provide an ID of a user that we want to delete. So here let's say delete, and then we can open this tab. And let's go to the first page. And let's say that we want to delete, for example, this user. So we need to copy his ID. Let's copy it. And let's come here, and we need to paste his ID here. And in authorization, we need to provide the token. So it is already provided. So let's click send. And as you can see, user deleted successfully. So as you remember, we had 3 users. Now we should see only 2 users. So now I need to say get all users. And previously we had, as you can see, we had 3 users. Now let's click send. And now we have only 2 users. Let's see it in our database. So here we have 3 users. Let's click refresh. Now we have only 2 users. Okay, so what else can we do? We have routes to be able to register, to log in, to get all users as an admin, as a user. And this was for deleting. So let's say delete user. So let's save it. Okay. So we tested all these routes, and let's come here. And here we need to be able to test this refresh route and logout. And they are not protected, as you can see. Okay, so let's test them. So now let's create a new request and it has to be get method because it will be for refresh. And here let's just choose this one, and it has to be auth and refresh. We need to choose the correct method, so let's click send. As you can see, we have access token for this user who is Tom. Okay, so let's save this route as well. And in a nutshell, we need this route to keep users logged in without forcing them to log in again every 15 minutes, okay, as you remember. Okay, now let's create one more request to be able to log out. So here let's say logout, and the method has to be post, and here let's choose this path, but here we need to say logout. And again, we need to choose the correct method. So let's click send. And as you can see, user logged out successfully. Okay, that's it guys. We have tested all the routes. And now let's do the front end part. For that, let's open our terminal. And from here, let's create a new terminal. And let's go to the front end folder. And now we need to say npm create with at latest, and I will write dot so that everything will be created inside this folder without creating any other folders. So let's press enter, and here let's choose React, and for now I will close this backend folder. Okay, and here let's choose JavaScript, and let's type npm install and press enter. Okay, and now we also need to install the following. Let's install React Router DOM to handle navigation between pages. So let's say React Router DOM. And also we need to install Axios so that our frontend will be able to make requests to the backend. So let's press enter. Okay, and now we need to install Tailwind CSS. So let's visit their website. Here let's click get started, and we can skip the first part because we have done it. And let's copy this command and paste it in our terminal and press enter. Okay, now we need to make some changes inside vid.config.js file. So let's copy this and let's open vid.config.js file and paste it right here, this import Tailwind CSS. And let's copy Tailwind CSS, and next to React, we can write Tailwind CSS. So let's save this file. Okay, now we need to copy import Tailwind CSS, and inside frontend folder, inside source folder, we can find a file called index.css. We can delete everything there and paste it. Okay, and that's it. Okay, and now let's write npm run dev and start our frontend. So let's open it. Great. Now let's close the terminal, and I will also delete app.css. And let's close the tabs that we don't need. So let's close them. Okay, now inside index.html, we can change this default title to whatever we want. So I'll just say MERN user system. So let's save it and let's close this tab. Now we can come to app.g6 and we can delete this boilerplate code. So I will just create a div, I will say hello, and I will remove these imports. So let's save it. And as you can see, we have hello. Okay, and now we can set up a global authentication context in our application, in our React application. So let's create a folder called context. And here we can create a file called auth context. .j6. So why do we even need it? So we need this React context for authentication that stores the user's login status, role, and access token globally. So we can use it across the whole app without passing props manually. You'll understand everything better as we keep going, okay? So here let's say const auth context will be equal to create context, which we need to import. So by doing this, we create a new context that will store and provide authentication data to components. Okay, then let's say export const auth provider will be equal to children. Okay, and children here represents JSX element which will be nested inside the auth provider component when it will be used. So using this auth provider component, we will use this auth provider component and we will wrap a whole application in it. Okay, so as I said, this context provider will handle if the user is already authenticated when the app starts. Okay, and here let's define some states which will be auth. So let's say set auth will be equal to use state, and by default it will be null. So let's say null. And then we want to have state for loading, and by default it will be true. So auth will store user info like access token and role, and loading tells the app to wait while we check if the user is logged in. So by having this state, we will implement functionality which will prevent showing the run screen before we know the status. Okay, and then here we want to have a use effect hook, and dependency array will be an empty array. So it will depend on an empty array. So this will run once the app starts because of the empty dependency array. And now we want to create a function to check authentication. So let's say const check auth will be equal to a synchronous function. And here we want to say try and catch block. And here let's say const response will be equal to, and let's close it. So here we need to use Axios. So let's say import Axios from Axios. And here let's say await Axios dot get method. And here we need to provide the path. And we can provide either the full path or a short path. So let's say API, auth, and refresh. Right now this will not work, so we need to come to vid.config.js file and make some changes. So here let's say server proxy, and as you can see here we have some configuration. So every single time we have API, this will be like in front of this API. This will be like a prefix. So this is our target because our backend is running on this port. So that's why we can write 5000. So let's save it. And now we can just write API because every single time we write API, this path will be in front of it. So we can use it this way. Okay. So we need to send a GET request to API auth and refresh. So it will be like, we ask the server, like, does this user have a valid refresh token? If yes, give me a new access token and role. And then here we need to say with credentials to be true. So this is required to send the cookie which holds the refresh token to the backend. So that's why we can say with credentials to be true. So without this, the server will not know who the user is. Okay. And then we can say set auth access token to be response.data.access token and role to be response.data.role. Okay. So if everything is successful, we want to store the new access token and role in state. Okay. And if there is an error, we can say set auth to be null. So this means that the refresh token is invalid or expired, so user is logged out. And finally, we can say, let's say finally, set loading to be false. So whether the request succeeded or failed, we now know the user's state, so we stop showing loading screens or blocking protected routes. Great. I think that it's clear to you. If you have some questions, feel free to write them in the comments. And let's call this function here. Okay, And now let's return the following. Let's return auth context.provider component. So let's say return. Okay, so this is a special component provided by React's context API. So it makes values like auth, set auth, and loading available to any child component. So think of it like a wrapper that shares data globally across the app without passing props manually at every level. So without it, we would need to pass auth and set auth and loading manually through props to every component that needs it. And context lets us skip that and access shared state from anywhere in our component tree. Okay, and finally, we need to say export const use auth will be equal to use context and our auth context. So by doing this, we define and export a custom React hook called useAuth. And by using this useAuth custom hook, our components will be able to get access to these values easily. Okay, so let's save this file. And I think that now it's clear to you. Okay, so now let's come to app.j6, and actually we can create pages folder where we will have pages for login. So let's say login, then for register, also we will have admin dashboard and user dashboard. Okay, and also we can create a folder called components, and there we can create a file called navbar.j6. So now let's work with this navbar component. So first of all, let's use our navbar component inside app.j6 so that we'll be able to see the changes that we are making. So here let's say navbar. Okay. Now let's use nav tag instead of div tag, and we can apply some basic styles. Let's say that background color will be gray 800. Then we can add some padding, which will be 4, and we can say that text will be white. So let's save it. Okay. Now we can say that we want to have a div, and here we want to have a link component, which comes from React Router DOM. So let's use it. Okay, but as you can see, we have an error because we need to wrap our application in browser router so that we will be able to use routes. So for that, let's remove this div and let's say browser router, which comes from React Router DOM. And now we just need to wrap our application in this browser router. And now we have this link component. Okay, now we can use it, so we shouldn't forget to do that. And to this div, we can say that class name will be container, display will be flex, justify will be between, and items will be sender. So if we hover over container, you can see the beauty of Tailwind CSS. After this link, we want to have a div, and here we need to show links, either logout or login and register links, but we need to know which one to show. So for that, first of all, let's import auth state from useAuth hook that we have just created. So as you can see here, we have auth, and if we open this auth context, as you can see, we have this state, and this state will have this role and will have this access token. So we can check if there is an access token. So we can say if auth, and we need to use optional chaining, and then we need to see access token. So if auth.access token is true, we need to show something. If it is false, we need to show something else. So why do we need to use optional chaining here? So our app may render before the use effect in Auth provider finishes fetching the token. So if we don't write this optional chaining, we have a risk that access token that we are trying to access will be null, okay? And by using optional chaining, we prevent ourselves from getting into that situation. So we prevent ourselves from app crashes. And by doing this, we just safely access nested properties. Okay, so if auth.access token is really true, then we want to show a fragment which will contain a button to be able to log out. So here I will say logout. And if auth.access token is not true, then we want to show another fragment which will contain links to be able to log in and to be able to register. Okay, so let's save it. And looks like we have an error and we need to remove it. So let's save it. And looks like we have an error. And let's find out why. It is because we didn't import use auth hook. So let's import it. And we still have a problem because we didn't wrap our application in provider that we have just created here. So we need to wrap our whole application because we didn't wrap our application in auth provider. So let's do it. So let's remove it. And let's say auth provider. And let's paste this navbar here. Okay, now we have wrapped our application. Right now it is just navbar inside auth provider. And all the errors should be gone. But looks like we still have a problem. So let's find out why. So we have that use state is not defined at auth provider. So let's import use state and try one more time. And use effect is also isn't imported. So let's import it. And yes, we need to import it. So now the errors are gone. And since auth.access token isn't true, we see these two links to be able to register and login. But if auth.access token was true, we would see this button. Okay, and let's add some styles to this button. Let's say class name, and here let's say that background color will be red 600, and padding horizontally will be 3 and vertically it will be 1. And we can say that it will be rounded, and on hover background color will be a bit darker. So we will not spend too much time on styling. We just want some basic styles. Okay, and now of course we need functionality to be able to log out. So let's create a function called handle logout to be able to log out. So it has to be asynchronous, and we also want to use try and catch block. Okay, so here let's say try and catch block. Here we need to say await axios.post method, and we tested this route as you remember. So we need to just provide the path, which will be API auth logout, and then we need to pass an empty object as the second argument, and with credentials true has to be the third argument. And then we can say that auth will be null. So that's why we can say set auth to be null. And let's import this set auth. So you may wonder why we need to pass this empty object. So in our case, we are not sending any data in the body, but still want to pass the third argument, which is with credentials. So we must explicitly pass an empty object as the second argument. So that's why, okay? And also, after logout, we want to navigate our user to the login page. So for that, we can create a variable called navigate. And here we want to use navigate hook, which comes from React Router DOM. So let's import it. Okay. Now let's use this navigate function, and we want to navigate our user to the login page after successful logging out. Okay. So it says redirect to login after logout. And in case of some errors, we can show the error in the console. So we can remove this comment. Okay, so let's save it and we can remove this unused import. So we need to use this function when we click this button. So let's say on click event, we want to use this function. So that's it for navbar. We have the functionality to be able to log out. Okay, now let's work with login. So let's open this login component. And here let's work with layout. And at the same time, we should go to the login page, and to be able to see the changes that we are making inside app.j6, we can use routes and we can use this login.j6 then, okay? Because right now, if we click login, as you can see, we don't see anything. So under this navbar, we can use routes component, which comes from React Router DOM, and we can use a route. The path will be login and the element will be login, but we just need to import login component. Okay, and looks like we have an error. So let's find out why. It is because routes is not defined. So let's define routes and route. So let's save it. And now we are on the login page and we can start styling it. So let's say that max width will be medium, margin left and margin right will be auto. We can say that margin top will be 10, padding will be 6, and background color will be white, and it will be rounded large. And we can say that we want to have some shadow, which will be XL. So let's save it. Okay. Then we can create h2 tag and we can wrap this text there. So let's say that it will be h2 tag and we can add some styles to it. So let's say that text will be 2XL and font will be bold and margin bottom will be 4, for example. So let's save it. Great. Okay. Then we can create a form. And inside this form, we want to have a div. And inside this div, we want to have an input field. Type will be email. And for the placeholder, we can also say email. And the value of this will be form.email, but we don't have these states yet. So let's create states. So first of all, let's create this form state. I will say form set form. And here we can remove this React. And we just need to import this use state hook. Okay. And we can remove this React. Then we can create a state for error. So let's say error, set error, and by default it will be null. So as I said, value will be form.email, and on change, we can get access to this event object, and then we can say set form, and we want to keep all the previous fields. So in this case, we want to refer to this password. So we want to keep all the previous fields, and we just say form, and then we want to change only the value of this email. So we say event.target.value. So we want to change the value of this field to whatever we type, but we write form so that we want to keep all the previous fields as they were. Okay, and we can say that this input will be required, and we can add some basic styles. Let's say that width will be full and padding will be 2, and we want to have some border and it will be rounded. So let's save it. And here we go. And the same should be done for the password field. So let's put it here, and it has to be password. And for this placeholder, it has to be capitalized. So let's save it. Great. To this form, we can add some styles. We can come here and say that space will be 4. And after this div, we can create a button. And here we can say login. And by default, its type will be submit because we have it inside this form. And let's add some basic styles to it. I will just accept these styles. And here we go. Now let's make functionality to be able to log in. So for that, I will create a function called handle login. And we want to prevent the default behavior of a page when it is refreshing after a form submitting. So we want to prevent it. So for that, we can say event.prevent default. Then we can use try and catch block. Okay. And in case of some problems, we can just set error to be this error, and we can also show the error in the console. Then we want to have a response, which will be equal to await Axios. And here we need to provide our correct path, then our form, so our body, and with credentials to be true. Okay, here we say Axios.post. And it's a request, it's a post request to our server at the URL, which is API Auth login. Then the second argument, it's a request body, which is this form. And it represents an object here with 2 fields. And then we say with credentials to be true, it tells Axios to send cookies along with the request. Okay, so why we need it? So if our server sets or expects authentication cookies, those cookies will only be sent or received if we set with credentials to be true. So otherwise the browser will block them. Okay. And then if everything is successful, we can say set auth, but we don't have this auth yet. So first of all, let's import this set auth function from use effect hook that we have created. So if everything is successful, we want to say that access token will be equal to response.data.access token, and the role will be equal to response.data.role. And then we can show the response data in the console. So let's say console.log response.data. And then based on the role, we want to navigate our users on different pages. So for that, we can use navigate hook from React Router DOM. So first of all, let's import it. And using this navigate function, we want to navigate a user to some pages based on his role. So we can say if response.data.role is equal to admin, then we want to navigate him, let's say, to the admin page. Okay, so if response.data.role is equal to admin, we want to navigate him to the admin page, else we want to navigate him to the user page. Okay, and we need to use this function when we click this button to be able to log in. So let's use it here. And as you can see, error isn't used. So we can use this error under this h2 tag. So let's say error, and I will just accept it. Okay, so let's save this file. And now let's try to log in. So as you remember, guys, we have 2 users. One of them is a regular user and one of them is an admin. So now I will open my console. Okay, so here let's say tom@gmail.com and his password. So let's click login. And as we can see, Axios is not defined. So let's change that. So let's import Axios from Axios and try one more time. So here I will provide his credentials. And let's click login. As we can see, we have this access token and the user data. And as you can see, we are logged in, so we can log out And now guys, if we expand this, as you can see, we can see this user's data. As you can see, we have the name, which is a refresh token. So we have refresh token and the value. But at the same time, we can't see when it will be expired. So we can manually change that in authcontroller.js file. So let's do it. So for that, we need to come here and we need to say max age, which is 7 days. So we need max age so that we tell the browser how long it should last. And if we omit max age, the cookie becomes a session cookie, which is deleted when the browser closes. So when we provide this property, which is max age, we ensure that the browser stores the cookie persistently, in this case for 7 days. So that's why it's important to provide it. Okay. So by doing this, we will be able to see when the token will expire. Okay. And when it comes to clearing cookie, we can also provide this max age. Okay, so let's save this file. And try one more time. So now I will log out and let's log in as Tom again. And as you can see, now we have the date when it will expire. So if I make it bigger, you can see it. You can see the date. Okay, so now let's close these DevTools and now let's work with register. So now let's work with register page, and for that I can just come here and copy everything that we have inside login page and I can paste it inside register page. And let's change it to be register, and register. Here we need to create a function called handle submit, not handle login. And also we don't need to use this set auth because we will simply navigate a user to the login page after he registers. Okay. So here we want to leave this prevent default, and then we want to say, so we can just basically remove everything here and we can say await axios.post and the form with credentials to be true. Okay, so that's it. And in case of some errors, we can leave it as it is. And as I said, we want to navigate him to the login page. So let's say login. So we redirect to login after successful registration. And we want to have one more field here. It will be username. Okay. And it means that we need to have one more input field. So we can just copy this div and paste it here. So it will be for username. And when we click this button, we should use this function. And now inside app.g6, we need to create one more route for register. So let's say register and register component. Okay. So now let's log out first. Now I will go to the register page and let's save this file. And as you can see, now we can register. So let's try to register. Here, let's say Kevin and provide all the fields. So let's click register. And now we are on the login page. So let's see our user in our database. So let's click refresh. And here, as you can see, we have Kevin and his role is user by default. Okay. And now when a user logins, we want to show his data. For example, when a regular user logs in, we want to show his personal info like username, email, and so on. And we don't want users to access certain pages unless they are logged in. So that's where private route component comes in. It's like a gatekeeper. So let's create this private route component. Okay. And here let's say the following. Let's say export default function private route component. Okay, and here what we have. So first of all, we need to import auth and loading states from use auth hook that we have. Okay, and here we have children. It's the component to render, like for example admin page or user page. And here we also want to have allowed roles property, so it will represent a list of roles allowed to access this page. Okay, then here we have auth and loading. So auth contains user info like username and so on, and loading is true while we are checking if the user is logged in. Then if loading is true, we just want to return this text like we show this loading screen. Okay, and then if auth isn't true or auth.access token isn't true, we want to navigate to the login page. Okay, so if the user isn't logged in, we redirect him to the login page, and then we can check if the user's role isn't in allowed roles. So if it is not like that, we want to redirect them away to the login page as well. So if role isn't allowed, we just redirect them to the login page. And then finally, we want to say return type of children will be equal to function. So if type of children is a function, then we want to say children auth. So we want to pass this state to our children if type of children is function. If not, we just want to leave them as they are. Okay, so if children is a function, we call it and pass the auth object to them. Otherwise, we just render the component normally as it is. So that's it. We have our private route. We will use it for user page, for his personal user page, and admin dashboard. So let's go to app.j6, and here we can do the following. We can create a route here. So let's say route, and the path will be homepage, and the element will be okay. And when it comes to element, we want to use our private route component. So let's use it. And here we need to do the following. As you remember, we can get access to this auth state. So we need to say auth, and if auth.role is admin, we want to show admin dashboard. If not, we want to show user dashboard. But instead of these tags, we actually want to use real components. So let's use them, and the same should be done here. So let's just say import admin dashboard, and the same for user dashboard. Okay, so this is how private routing works. We just created this component, and we take this auth state from auth context, and we pass it to our children, and then here we can get access to it, and based on role we want to show either this component or this component. Okay, and as you remember guys, when we worked with login, as you can see, we navigated to admin page or user page, but we can say immediately that they don't exist. So instead of this, we can just navigate to the home page. Okay, so redirect to home after successful login. Okay, so now let's work with user dashboard. So what a user should see when he logs in just as a regular user. So let's work with it. Okay, so let's create a function for our user dashboard. So here it is, and let's save it. And now I will log in as a regular user. So Kevin is a regular user. So now I will log in as Kevin, and we should get redirected to the home page. Okay, so let's click login. And as you can see, we are on the home page, but at the same time, we don't have any text here. So as you can see, we don't see this user dashboard text. So as you can see here, we have some problems. So it says the requested model doesn't provide an export name default. And the same works in admin dashboard and at register. So let's fix that and come back here. So here we need to say some default component. And when it comes to register, actually everything has to be fine with this register. So let's try one more time. So let's refresh the page. And as you can see, now we have this text and looks like the errors are gone. Okay, so let's work with this user dashboard component. So here, what I suggest to do is to create a function called fetch profile, and it should be inside useEffect hook. Okay, and the dependency array should depend on auth state that we need to get from our useAuth hook. So let's import useAuth, and here let's write the functionality that we need. So let's create a function const fetch profile, and it has to be synchronous. Okay, and here we can say if auth token isn't provided. So if auth.access token, if there is no access token, we just want to return. Okay, we don't want to show anything, we just want to return. Then we can say try and catch block. And in case of some problems, we can say console.error and this error. And actually we can create some states for our profile data. So profile will hold users data. So for that we can import useState hook, and then we can have one more state for error. And here not only we show this error in the console, but we can also set error to be this error. Okay, then we can say try and catch block, and here we want to have a response. Let's say const response will be equal to await axios dot get, and we need to provide our path, which is API users/me, and we shouldn't forget to import axios. So let's say import axios from axios, and then we need to provide headers and authorization, and inside bearer we need to provide auth.access token, and we need to use optional chaining so that we will not have a state when it will be undefined. So as you remember, in Postman we also did the same things. Okay, and also we need to say with credentials to be true. I also said why we need to say with credentials to be true. We provide authorization bearer token for protected route access, and with credentials true ensures that cookies are sent with the request. Okay, then we can say set profile. So if everything is successful, set profile to be equal to response.data. And finally, we can call this function right here. So this useEffect will depend on this auth state. So now I think that we can create some basic styles, and we can apply some basic styles. So let's say that we want to have container, margin X will be auto, margin top will be 10, and padding will be 6. Then we want to have h2 tag, and let's say user dashboard. And to this h2 tag, we can apply the following styles. Let's say that text will be 2XL, and font will be bold, and also margin bottom will be 4. So let's save it. Okay. And in case of some errors, we can also show it. So if there is an error, we want to provide it. Then if profile is true, only then we want to show our user's data. Okay, we can say if profile is true, we want to show his data. So I think that that's it. So let's save this file. And as you can see, we have profile information. Username Kevin, email Kevin, and role is user. Great. Now let's see what will happen if we refresh the page. As you can see, there is some delay, And when we refresh the page, we see loading text, and then with some delay, we can see our info. Okay, now I am logged in, and if I try to go to the login page, let's see what will happen. So I will say login, and as you can see, without any problems, I can go to this login page, but I don't want it to happen. Okay, so let's take care of that. So for that, we will implement similar logic to private route, but this time it will be public route. So let's say public route.j6, and here we need to say export default function and public route. Okay, and here we need to get access to auth and loading states from use auth hook. So let's import them, and then if loading is true, we just want to return this text, and if auth is true and if there is access token, we just want to return to home if already authenticated. Okay, and finally we want to return children. So we want to render the public route if not authenticated. And we shouldn't forget to import navigate component from React Router DOM. Okay, so let's save it. And now we need to use it properly. Oops. We need to use it properly inside app.j6. And when it comes to this login, we just need to wrap it inside our public route that we have just created. And we need to do the following, and the same should be done with register. So let's just copy this, and here let's say register. Okay, so now as you can see, I am immediately on the home page since I am logged in. If I try to go to the login page, as you can see, I can't do it, and the same will happen if I try to go to the register page. Okay, so that's it for user info. Okay, and now I will try to log out, and then I want to log in as an admin. So let's say Tom is admin. So let's say login. And as you can see, I still have this user dashboard, even though I should see admin dashboard. And as you can see, it's clear that our role is admin. Okay, so let's find out why we have this. Well guys, I realized that here we didn't import navigate as well. So let's import it. Well guys, I found out why we had that error is because when we set this role, we need to say response.data.user, and only then we need to say role. Okay, so let's save that. And now if we go to private route, everything else can be left as it is, I think. Now let's return to app.j6, and now let's refresh the page, and as you can see, we are on admin dashboard. So we need to be very careful when it comes to nested properties. Okay, now let's work with admin dashboard. Okay, so let's open admin dashboard component and let's start working with it. First of all, let's define some states. Here, let's say const users. And here we need to use just use state. Let's just import use state hook and remove this React. Then we need a state for page. So like current page. Okay, so let's say set page. By default, it will be 1. Then total pages. And by default, it will be also 1. And a state for error. By default, it will be null. So users, page, total pages, and errors. So users will store the list of users. Page controls which page of users we are currently on. So it's like for pagination. And total pages tells us how many pages exist. And error is for displaying an error message to the admin. Okay, then let's create a use effect hook, and it will depend on page and auth. And we should get access to this auth state from use auth hook, which we have created. So let's say Auth from use Auth, but we shouldn't forget to import it. So this use effect will depend on these two properties, page and Auth. And then here we can create a function called fetch users. So let's say fetch users, it will be asynchronous. And here we can say if there is no access token. So we can say if there is no access token, we just want to return and nothing will happen. Then we can use try and catch block. And in case of some errors, we can just show them like this. And inside this try block, we can say const response will be equal to await Axios dot get method. And let's import Axios from Axios. Okay. And here we need to provide our path, and here we need to use backticks because we will use page, and that's why we need to use backticks. So as you can see here, we say API users and then page, like which page we want to show. Okay. And here also we can say that we want to limit it for 2. So it means that for each page we want to show only 2 users. It's completely up to you. You can do how many you want. And then we want to provide headers and authorization to be bearer auth.access token. So we add the token in the authorization header as bearer token. And then we need to provide with credentials to be true. So let's say with credentials to be true. So it's included to send cookies. Okay, great. Next, what we can do next. Let's say that we want to show users by saying set users to be equal to response.data.users. And then we want to know total pages. So we can say set total pages to be equal to response.data.total pages. So if everything is successful, we can do the following. And let's use this function right here. Okay. And also we want to be able to delete a user. So for that, we can create a separate function. So let's say handle delete. Okay. It will be asynchronous and it will accept an ID. So here, let's say try and catch block. Okay. And here we can say await Axios.delete. And here we provide again headers and with credentials to be true. And we provide the correct path and the ID of a user. And then we filter out the deleted user from users array. Great. Now let's work with layout. Here we need to show our users and we can add some styles. So here let's create h2 tag and I will say admin dashboard. And we can add some styles to it. Let's say that it will be container and basically the same styles which we applied in the user dashboard. And now we have an error, failed to resolve Mongoose, but it shouldn't even be here. Okay, now we can add some styles to this h2 tag. Let's say that text will be to Excel and font will be bold. Great. And in case of some errors, we can show them like this. And we can create h3 tag and we can say user management. And let's apply some styles to it, some basic styling. Text will be Excel, font will be semi-bold, and margin bottom will be 4. So let's save it. Great. And to this h2 tag, we can also add some margin bottom, which will be 4. Now we can display all the users. So let's say users.map, and we need to use optional chaining in order to not have some errors. So we can say user, and we just want to show each user. So for that, we can use li tag and we can provide key. So we need to provide a unique key. And here we can say user._ID. And here let's show user.username, for example, to see if we have them or not. And as you can see, we have John and Tom. So John is another user and Tom is the currently logged in user. Great. Now we can wrap this into a span tag. and we can also show user email. So let's say user.email and user role by saying user.role. Great. And then here we want to have a button to be able to delete a user. So let's say button, and let's say delete, and let's add some class. Let's add some styles to it. I'll just accept it. And when we click this button, we should use that function, which is handle delete. And here we need to provide user's ID. So let's say user._ID. So let's save it. Actually, we need to wrap these users inside unordered list. And we can add some styles to it. So let's say that space will be 2. Okay. So now let's try to delete this user, which is John. And John is gone. And if we refresh the page, we have Kevin, as you can see, right? And let's work with pagination. And also, let's see if John is gone or not in our database. So let's refresh it. Okay, now using Postman, I'll just add some more users so that we'll be able to work with pagination and understand it better. Now, as you can see, we have 6 users. Okay, now we need to implement pagination buttons. Okay, and here let's say array.from, and basically we can just accept it. Okay, and here we want to have a button. So this is a JavaScript array generation trick, and array.from length total pages. It creates an empty array with total pages, which is number of elements. Okay, then here we have underscore and index. So this is the callback function for array.from, which is called for each element, and it takes 2 parameters, underscore and index. Underscore, it is the current item, we ignore it, so that's why it is underscore. And index, it's the index which we use to determine the page number. Okay, and here we want to have a button, as I said, and here we need to say index +1 to go to the next page. And each button should have a unique key, which will be index in this case. And when we click this button, we want to say set page to be index +1. And based on that, we can add some styles to it. So let's say that we're gonna have the following styles, and we need to use backticks for that because some of them will be dynamic. So let's add some basic styling, and here we need to use a condition. So if page is equal to index +1, so if the current page state equals index +1, the button should be styled as active. Okay, so if it is the case that we have, then we want to apply these styles. If not, we want to apply these styles. So if it is active, background color has to be 600 and text has to be white. Otherwise, it has to be gray 200. So let's save it. Okay. So now we have only one page, but I will refresh it. And as you can see, now we have several pages. So let's click the second page. And as you can see, we have these users. So now let's try to delete a user. For example, I will delete this user and he is gone. Now let's refresh the page and we have our users. Okay, and now guys, you may wonder what will happen if an admin deletes himself. So if it happens, we should set Auth to be null and immediately navigate him to the login page. Okay, so let's say if auth.user.id, so .user.id is equal to this incoming ID. So if it is self-deletion, we need to say set Auth to be null, and looks like we don't have it, so we need to import it, and then we need to say if Auth, so if the deleted user is the currently logged in user, we need to clear Auth. So if it is like that, else we can use this function. So let's say else. Okay. And also we can navigate this user to the home page. I mean, to the login page. So for that, let's say the following. We have done it many times today. So let's import it and let's use this function and navigate him to the login page. So let's save it. And now I will delete this currently logged in admin. So guys, as you saw, I managed to delete an admin anyway. So as you remember, we did this, but it didn't help because I forgot that Auth doesn't contain ID, but it contains role. So that's why I managed to delete the admin, but then I manually created that admin again, and here it is. So to prevent admins from deleting admins, we can come to Auth controller, I mean user controller, okay? And here we can do the following. And now we can modify this function a little. First of all, here let's just say find by ID, okay? So we just find a user by ID, and then we need to find out the role of this user. So let's say if user.role is equal to admin, then we can say return response with status code 403, cannot delete admin user, and let's say admin users, and only then we can say await user find by ID and delete and provide the ID here. So let's save it. Okay. Now let's go to admin dashboard, and here we need to check. And now we can remove it completely as it was previously. Okay. So let's paste it like this. And now we need to do the following. If the currently logged in user is admin, we shouldn't even show this button. Okay. So let's do the following. If, let's say, if user.role isn't equal to admin, only then we want to show this button. So let's save it. And as you can see, now it is gone and we can delete these users. Now let's make one of these users to be admin as well. So for example, let's make Liam to be admin. So let's do it manually in our database. So first of all, let's click refresh. And now I want to make Liam to be admin. So let's click update. Okay. Now let's refresh the page. And Liam is admin now. Okay, now let's try to do it in Postman. So first of all, let's get all users as an admin, of course. So let's click send, and we have that we have invalid token. So we need to log in as Tom. So let's click login, and let's take this token, and we need to come to this, and we need to update the token. And now we have all the users, and as you can see, Liam is an admin. So I want to take his ID and go to the delete user, and let's paste it here, and let's try to click send. Oops, I still have invalid tokens, so I need to come here, copy this, and get back here, and we need to update this token. Let's click send, and as you can see, we have cannot delete admin users. Let's get back to the website, and for example, let's go to the second page, and here, for example, let's delete Jamie, and Jamie is gone. Let's go to the first page, then let's go to the second page. You guys noticed that when I was on the second page and when the total number of users was 5, so when I was on the second page and deleted a user, the number of pages didn't become 2 immediately. it became 2 only after I visited the first page. I don't think that it's a good experience, so we can fix that. Now I can go to Postman and create one more user, and I'll be back in a second. So I added one more user, so let's refresh the page. And as you can see, now we have several users. So now, for example, if I delete this user and I am on the second page, as you can see, we still have 3 pages, but it should be 2 pages, because on the second page and on the third page we have only one user. So on the second page we have one user, and on the third page we have one user. Now if I go to the first page, as you can see, only now we have 2 pages. So for that we can refetch users. So let's copy this, okay, and right here we can refetch users. So let's say refetch users. Then we need to check if current page becomes empty and it's not the first page, we need to go back. So here let's say if response, yeah, basically we can just accept it. So if response.data.users.length is equal to 0 and page is more than 1, we need to go back a page if the current page is empty. Okay, so if we meet this condition, we do this. Else we can say set users to be equal to response data.users and set total pages to be equal to response.data.total pages. So let's save it, and now I will add some more users, and then we will see if we manage to do it or not. And of course here I should remove this set users. Okay, so let's save it, and it has to be the right version. So I'll be back in a second. Okay, so let's refresh the page, and now we have, as you can see, we have 5 users. Now if I delete, for example, this user while I am on the second page, let's see what will happen. As you can see, we immediately have 2 pages and everything seems to be correct. So here we have Kevin and Liam, and here we have Tom and Bruce. So I think that this experience is much better than we had it before. Okay guys, and also if you want to show the currently logged in user email right here in navbar, we can do it. So in Auth context.js6, we need to come here and we need to say email property to be equal to response.data.user.email. So let's save it. Okay, so inside navbar.js6, we can come here, we can create a div, and here we can show our email. So let's say auth.email. So let's save it. And now let's refresh the page. And as you can see, now we see the currently logged in user's email. Okay, so that's it guys. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet. Thank you, I really appreciate it.